Break out those water wings, you're back at the card pool. I'm your host, Stu.
And I'm Kyle. It's good to be back, isn't it?
It is, and this water is refreshing. So today we are looking at part 2 of our Hidden Gem set. This is going to be our cards 1 through 5 that we're allowed to pick closer to the top of the pyramid, as we like to say now.
Exactly, and we're going to be getting to number 1, so be excited. We're once again looking at Mirrodin. And if you want to take a look back at some of the other cards that we mentioned before that made up our 10 through 6, you can take a look at our previous video. First Hidden Gems video. Money cards are next, so stay tuned for that.
And that segues right into our next thing about money cards. Now, all these cards we're selecting are not of the 10 richest of the set. So we're trying to find the other good, that stuff to fertilize your decks with. What can we go ahead and make growth out of?
That sounded a little dirty, but okay, whatever. Let's just keep going here.
Gardening is dirty, Kyle.
All right.
So we're going to start off at my number 5, Kyle, and it is a card called Whale of the Nim. No idea what a Nim is, but it is there.
All right, you've triggered me, Stu. I'm going to do another segment here. Well, I'll let you read the card first, but explain to me why this card isn't terrible. But go ahead and read it first.
This card is blatantly, obviously not terrible, Kyle. I'm actually surprised in this one. All right, so this is a 3-drop instant. It costs 2 generic and a black, and it has has 2 modal effects that you can maybe pay and get both. So the first one being is you can regenerate each creature you control, or you can have it so this card goes ahead and deals 1 damage to each creature and each player. And it has an entwine cost, meaning you can get both effects if you play an additional black, which will then make it so the entire cost of this spell would just be 4 mana.
Okay, so why is this not terrible?
So the reason why this isn't terrible is because, sure, board wipes happen in the game, but there's not a lot of ways to protect your creatures from them. And this is a great way to go ahead and preserve your board state, especially if you're doing stuff with tokens and everything else like that. Somebody plays a Damnation, a Wrath of God. Sure, this wouldn't work on a Cyclonic Rift, but also somebody has a whole bunch of combos going on. There are tons of creatures that are pingers, or you go ahead, I forget the Rakdos guy, but it pretty much makes it so whenever a creature dies, you put a counter on it, you can remove a counter, destroy another creature.
Right, the Deathbringer, Thoktar, similar cards, yeah.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of different ways to like combo it, make it so the whole board is gone. So also, if you go ahead and you make it so that you need a board wipe for a whole bunch of big token things, this is an answer for something like that. Like 1/1 Ls, 1/1 humans. Like we have a whole bunch of little things out there that are like a problem. And like also like 1/1 slivers. Like we have Sliver Queen in the game. Like she can make a whole army really quick.
I know, I guess I'm giving you a little bit of a hard time. This card isn't blatantly terrible. It's just one of those things where I'm like, I just don't get it. Like, I mean, 1 damage to everything. I mean, sure, that might matter sometimes, but probably not like most of the time. And then the regenerating each creature, yes, that can potentially save you from a board wipe, but a lot of board wipes these days are either bounce or exile or have specifically do not regenerate.
Well, no. Most of them do not regenerate. There was a section of time where a lot of board wipes did. Like that's the difference between like Day of Judgment and Wrath of God.
Right, but a lot of the best ones are holdovers from that era. So.
But also to note, this is not a sorcery. This is an instant. So let's say you go ahead and you do some combo tricks. Like sure, you can double block creatures, and then let's go ahead and have it so the damage is not really going to affect you and stuff like this in multiple ways. Like you can go ahead and make it so you can be a lot more trickier, because usually when you see this kind of stuff, this is on a sorcery and it's not in black. This is an off-color regenerate, which is really, really nice.
I mean, it's just not my kind of card, really. Usually, if I was playing a deck with black in it, I don't care if my entire field dies. I'm getting some kind of benefit out of it, so I'm not really bothered by trying to save them. But it's, you know, personal preference.
But
thing,
also,
really.
you are given the option to hit that button and blow up the field and preserve your stuff, which is something we've seen with our card in our last video, which is World Waker. Not World Waker. That's a Zelda game.
World Slayer.
World Slayer. Yeah, I'm out of it. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Check back on our other video if you want to see our discussion about that particular soul-crushing card. But anyway, let's go on to my number 5 here, if you don't mind.
Sure.
All right, so my number 5 is, again, hooray, we're not doing artifacts anymore, at least not for a little while. Viridian Joiner. This is a 1/2 elf druid for 3 mana. Has a tap ability where he taps to give you an amount of green mana equal to Viridian Joiner's power. So, straight up just looking at the card like this, like, oh, so it's a 3 mana elf, not very big, taps for 1 mana. Okay, whatever. Not great, moving on. But think about think about the fact that his power is obviously scalable, right? There are a lot of cards that do the same kind of thing, but this was kind of the original one. Because remember, the one that's really, really popular is Gyre Sage from the Return to Ravnica block. People are like, oh my god, you know, stacking counters on this thing. It taps mana for every counter on it. That's really cool. why aren't there other cards like this? Well, there were. We just didn't know about them. Because I remember when I was building my Azuri Claw of Progress deck and looking for cards like this, I looked back at the original Mirrodin, saw this card, and I was like, whoa, this existed? What the heck? So this is one of those really cool finds.
Well, it works
that
also
you would never expect to be there.
Outside of counters. Like, you can use equipments to go ahead and boost this.
Which was the main goal of this block, obviously.
Yeah, but also you have anthems which can go ahead and make it so like elves give each other +1/1 or something else like on the power. You have stuff like Mirari's Wake, which goes ahead and gives everyone power. So like there are good cards in green that can just go ahead and help with this. Also, let's say you want to play a Craterhoof Behemoth, but you want to play something else with it. Play the Craterhoof. Boost this guy, tap it, then you can make your other play, which is also really nice. Like,
yeah, so anything that lets you tap for mana that is like an arbitrary amount is really scary, and this is no exception.
Isn't there the green enchantment that came from Crimson Vow, where it like doubles the power of all creatures or something like that?
Right, it's 5 mana, doubles your creature's power until the end of the turn. Yes.
Yeah, it's only
so
used on
that's
your turn
yet
or
another
something.
example of something that makes this card really powerful. So yeah, just a great scalable card that a lot of people overlook, I feel.
And you can also use like a bad green cantrip on this, something like to go ahead and make
giant growth even turns this into 4 mana, for example.
Yeah, so it's like
good.
you could do some stuff like that, but again, you would want to. This is great in some elf ball kind of stuff, like not Priest of Titania. I'm not going to remember the name.
I would argue that in a lot of ways it's almost better than Gyre Sage because it actually taps for mana to start with. Gyre Sage does not.
Well, again, one is self-scalable, so you do have to do a little bit of work. I mean, you have to do a little bit of work either way you look at it, but the fact that this is a mana dork on its own
makes it a little bit better in my opinion, but that's just me.
Yeah, but I mean, there is also the Graft Land, so you could use that for either argument in this case.
But yeah, let's move on to what your number 4 is.
My number 4 is a card that everyone has seen and not many have played against. It is a card called Time Sifter. It's a 5-drop artifact, and it reads, at the beginning of each player's upkeep, each player removes the top card of his or her library from the game. The player who removed the card with the highest CMC takes an extra turn after this one. If 2 or more players are tied for the highest, the players repeat the process until the tide is broken. It's a paragraph on this card. I apologize.
No, it's not that. I just like threw up in my mouth a little thinking about this card. I hate it.
It's interesting because it makes it so like efficient CEDH decks that are like super like their mana curve is under 3 for almost everything, or they have a way to get like super fast synergies out there. They are penalized because they're not going to get another turn unless, you know, other players hit a land and they have like a 1-drop or something like that. But if you like to play a casual game of Commander and you want to use some big fatties, or you use a deck that cheats big fatties into play, like sneak attacks and stuff like that, this is just a powerhouse for that deck.
All right, I'm going to stop you right there. There is nothing casual about this card, okay? This is horrendous. It is horrific, and it is horrifying to have to play against this.
This can die to removal, and it's an artifact.
If you ever get a turn again, okay?
No, just don't tap out.
No.
And you can also destroy this without having to use mana. Like, you can just have a permanent enter with something like not Mirari's Wake. Aura Shards are also tap effects on creatures, where it's like you can go ahead and just tap creatures, destroy stuff. So, again, if there's a green player on the table, this can probably be an answer. But a green player would want this card because how big are their CMCs? This is great.
This card gives me PTSD so bad. Ugh. It's like
many other things.
God. It's awful because it's just like I've played multiple games where this just kind of locks everybody out except for like one person who gets lucky every single time and takes all the turns. It's horrific. Like I said, it's like you just can't get rid of it.
Well, you could
it's terrible.
also lock down the game with something like a scroll rack. Let's say you have some sort of big fatty in your hand. You just never play it. You always just go ahead and scroll rack it on top, keep going ahead and keeping the turns in your favor. You could lock down the game with something like this.
Well, you could. Extra turns are just disgusting and unfun as a rule, and repeated extra turns are especially disgusting and unfun.
But these give the illusion of fairness. And I like that, even if it's a lie.
It is a lie, and that's why you should hate it.
Yeah, but it's better. This is honestly fairer than something like a time walk.
In what way?
It isn't definitively you getting an extra turn.
It's a chaos card. I cannot stand chaos cards.
And also, if this is destroyed on your turn, it doesn't do anything. It's on the next upkeep. So this is an upkeep trigger. So
yeah, it's I really don't like this card. I'm
right,
sorry.
well,
Stu.
we'll move
I
on for
appreciate
you.
why you like it, but it's just, yeah.
This
Anyway.
is who I have to play games with.
Anyway, let's move on to the first land on this countdown. Number 4 for me is Cloudpost. So this is a colorless locust land. There are not very many lands with the locust type.
I thought it was Lucas.
Yeah, Lucas.
The George Lucas land.
Well, it comes into play tapped, but it taps for 1 colorless mana for each locust in play. So obviously, a single Cloudpost alone comes into play tapped, which is not all that great, and only taps for 1 mana. But the point of this card is very much playing multiples of them or multiple locust lands. There is only one other land right now with the locust subtype, and that's Glimmerpost,
Yeah, I was
which
gonna
is
say that.
honestly, like it's okay. The only reason to play it though would be to play it with a Cloudpost. And you don't even really need to do that. The way you make Cloudpost good is this is one of my favorite lands in my Orvar the All-Form deck.
That's
because I can just start
the commander.
copying this thing, and for every time I copy it, it gives me more and more and more mana. And even without an Orvar, you can do other things like play a Thespian Stage or play a Vesuva, lands that copy other lands, or just any permanent that can copy a land. You make more and more of these, they make so much mana.
Well, you could also even lithoform engine this. Now, we've been seeing a lot of things that make copy tokens lately, and this would be a prime suspect for something like that. Like, why would I not target like this? This is great.
Yeah.
But it is also for each other locus in play. So if you have a bunch and a player's able to go ahead and copy one of these, they kind of get the boost. And this could be oracled, and I'm wrong about this, but that's kind of the issue that you're running with slivers.
Well, that is true, and I doubt it's been changed. I mean, there would be no reason to.
Yeah, I guess that. But that would be also like the point of why you would also want to have some sort of land that is a copy. Because if somebody is doing something stupid with this, you get all the reward while they do all the work. Like, if you, let's say we make a changeling creature, and it's like slivers, and they have like indestructible, vigilance, death touch, all this other stuff. It's like, well, you just create a little guy with a whole bunch of stuff on this, and it's like, all right, I get something that's very powerful on the board without having to do anything. And this has that explosive potential.
Oh, it definitely does, and this really shines in formats where you can have, 4 copies of the same card in deck. Jamming 4 copies of Cloudpost feels really good. So it's just a cool card, even outside of that, though, because in Commander there are tons of ways to copy permanents.
Yeah, I mean, and this, for the reason you gave with the copy stuff, it's what makes this shine over something than the Tron lands,
right?
Which are like Urza's Factory, Warehouse, and all this other stuff.
You have to
like
go
that.
find. You have to go find each of the individual ones. Who cares? Just play this thing. It's so much easier.
It is. But in the other case, for in a different format and stuff like that, where it's like, all right, you can use multiples of each, then you can kind of go ahead and spice the mana out a little bit better.
And the fact that it enters the battlefield tapped makes it like slightly less busted, but still, it has potential to be very good.
It has its own niche, but it's something to note.
And the next card, Stu, you're number 3, and guess what, everyone? It's another Chaos card. So
I love me some Chaos. Why not change up the game for your own benefit? So at number 3, we're looking at an enchantment called Shared Fate. Now this is a 5-drop. It is 4 colorless and a blue, and it reads, if a player would draw a card, that player removes the top card of an opponent's library from the game face down instead. Each player may look at and play cards he or she removed from the game with Shared Fate as though they were in his or her hand.
Yeah, to be clear, this is not quite as horrific as Time Sifter, but it's still pretty bad.
Yeah, well, the thing is, like, all right, there are players who just draw a lot of cards because their commander wants it. Like, we have one of the gods, the Locust God, who's all about making so I want to draw cards, I got to do stuff. There are also decks that like to make it so everyone else draws, so they mill out. This is a great card for something like that, but also the interesting part about this is you can go ahead and use this as an explosive time bomb. Why not make it so you draw a bunch of cards, everyone exiles all their stuff, and then you blow this up? What happens to those cards? They're in exile. They don't get to use them. You still get the advantage of this. So it's kind of interesting when you put it out there because people at first are like, I don't mind, it's kind of like a second hand, it's kind of like using the graveyard, but this then becomes very fragile because if somebody hits this, everyone's going to lose their stuff. So you might actually see a dogfight to protect this and destroy this at the same time, which is very interesting with the politics of the game.
One thing that I will note, though, is unlike Time Sifter, which is just gross and I hate, this actually does have some applications for it. There are commanders that care about playing exiled cards. I mean, not that you could play it in the same colors, but Prosper would love this if it could fit into the same deck.
That is a great example.
Vega the Watcher, as a Azorius commander, benefits for whenever you cast a spell that's not from your hand. So that with Shared Fate is actually incredibly beneficial, and in Vega's case, you would draw a card for everything you cast with this, which is pretty good, honestly.
Yeah, and it's just very interesting for what it does, because we don't usually get to play with exile. Like, there's one card in green that can return something from exile. There's like 2 creatures that can return themselves from exile. But once something's in exile, it's more or less out of the game.
Right, we've started playing with that a lot more in recent sets. Like, Prosper is pretty much like the poster child for this, but the Exile Zone is becoming more and more like yet another hand, because like the Graveyard became a second hand, and now the Exile Zone's like a third hand, and there was so many hands.
We're going to have a new zone soon.
Yeah,
the Command
probably.
Zone's another hand.
Yeah, we'll see.
But yeah, this is just something where it's like, I feel like if you play this at the table, it hurts the player who's going ahead and drawing a lot of cards, because they are giving other people an advantage. And there is usually, when you're playing a game, no matter what state it is, there is always at least one player that's falling behind. Being able to give him something like this is very powerful. And also, you do one wheel. What's the effect here? Like, all right, let's do a windfall. Say everyone draws 5. They exile 5, and then they draw 5. You just took 10 cards out of a player's deck right there. That's...
Yep. I've played against this card too, and again, it makes the game just totally chaotic and nuts. And I mean, hey, that's some people like that. It's not my cup of tea, but
you throw off the tempo, you throw off the deck.
Whatever.
But moving on to your number 3, Kyle, what do you got?
Yes, well, this is kind of a cheat because I picked 5 cards in one, but I'm going to be talking about artifact lands. Indeed, yes. These are definitely, like, these were close to being my, like, #1 picks of the set, but I have other things that I want to talk about. So, artifact lands, there's 1 in every color. There's 5 of them total from this set, and they are just artifact. They're lands with an artifact subtype, so they are artifacts in addition to being lands. They all come in untapped. They tap for just like a normal land, you know, one mana of whatever color they are. So, yeah, I mean, I don't have too much to say about this, but just because of the fact they're obviously good. I mean, not only do they come into play untapped, so they're like decent lands to start with, but they up your artifact count for essentially doing nothing other than playing the game the way you want to play it. And yes, they are a little more vulnerable than usual lands because they can get blown up by like artifact spot removal
or the dual indestructible
or anything like that. Like, it could happen. But yes, we have been shown just how powerful these kind of lands are because we have just now have a cycle of dual color artifact lands in every single color pairing that are now entered the battlefield tapped but indestructible. Just as good, really. Really, they're almost just as good as these.
And to be clear, he's talking about the one strictly in Mirrodin, like not a Darksteel Citadel. But like, yeah, this is great for adding to an artifact count. Like you're saying, sometimes you need to just have an artifact to sacrifice and your board just got hit. The lands might sometimes survive that.
Exactly.
And if that's the case, it can keep giving you that flow. Also, it feels good going ahead and getting this with like something like a Trinket Mage, because at that point, it's like, all right, I don't need Soul Ring, I have Soul Ring, but I need more mana, I'm not drawing lands. Well, this is a land that works for that, too.
Because they're basically a substitute for basic lands, I honestly run as many of these as I can in a deck. Like, even if a deck only has, like, 1 artifact payoff, I'll run all 3 or 2 or however many I can run. Because it's just worth it.
Yeah, it just always feels bad when a Bane of Progress goes ahead and hits. It's like, not only did it hit everything else, but, like, now your mana cap is dropped by 1.
It can hurt, but the risk is well worth the reward, in my opinion.
Depending on what the synergy is. But everyone should know about these lands. And if you don't, take note.
And if you don't run them, you should. I don't know what you're doing, but you should run them.
So moving on to my number 2, we have a card that I didn't know existed until I was looking at this set. It's called Arcslogger. Now this is a 5-drop beast. It is 3 generic and double red with a 4/5 body. And it has for 1 red mana, go ahead and remove the top 10 cards of your library from the game, and then this creature will deal 2 damage to any target creature or player. Now I know what you're thinking, that 2 damage is doing a lot. That's the whole point you're using this. No, not at all.
I know what you're thinking, Stu. You're thinking, I'm about to ask you, explain to me why this card isn't terrible, but I'm not going to, because
it's just like terrible.
Just like the Goblin Charbelcher we discussed in our previous video, would it shock you to know that this card was competitive for a hot second?
Well, see, the thing is that I was thinking for is, like, if you are in, like, Is It, you can run a Laboratory Maniac, and then that'll work with this. That's the whole idea of what I was going
yeah.
for.
I mean, that's pretty much what most people see these days, right? Emptying out the library is a really good thing. There's so many win conditions that involve that, and this is a really easy way to do that for 1 mana, getting rid of 10 cards every time. Like, in a commander deck, worst case scenario, that's 10 activations and you're done. But it's going to be less than that.
It's going to be less, especially if it's, we'll say, turn 5.
Yeah.
So 7, and then you have at least 5 cards you've drawn, so that's 12 right there. And then let's go ahead and say you at least drew or tutored for some land or something. Yeah, you only need about 8 more activations, we'll say.
I don't know how this really stacks up in today's game. Like,
well, Beast Tribal,
I don't know, man.
Beast Tribal is pretty weak. We have a couple beasts that are awesome, but most of them I would say are subpar, and they are very costly on the mana cost. Hence why I said they're costly. Yeah. So this is something that would be a good tech for some tribal support in that regard, giving it as a win con, because it is an obvious threat once it hits the board. But again, I don't think most people know this if they are coming into the game as a newer player. This, like again, Mirrodin was how many years ago? And this was never reprinted. So it's like, all right, like if you didn't know this was back there, there's a lot of dust on top of it.
Yeah, well also, the benefit of this card is if you're willing to like basically get rid of your deck, 1 red mana for 2 damage to anything is actually not a bad rate.
No, it's a shock.
Yeah, so no, like I was saying, Slogger was actually competitive for a hot second because people would be jamming 120 card decks.
Oh, that's why.
With 4 copies of Slogger, just tutoring it out, and then spending their 10... Well, and remember, in a 20-life format, all you have to do is spend 10 mana and they're dead. So
yeah, that makes sense.
Back when the game was a lot simpler and it was a simpler time, Slogger was actually a go-to endgame for a lot of people.
That's
shockingly enough.
Actually funny because that's like almost like a new player. It's like, look at this combo I did. It's like, but if you did it this way, you would have won faster. Yeah. And it's like, well, you know, apples and potatoes.
Yeah.
But that is this card. If you didn't know about it, I definitely didn't before I looked at this set. So don't feel bad if Kyle's bullying you right there. But moving on to your number 2, Kyle. I've definitely seen this card before.
Oh, yeah. Speaking of bully cards, this is definitely one of them in my book. Number 2 for me is an equipment called Viridian Longbow. Now, this is a 1 mana equipment that costs 3 to equip, and the equipped creature gains the ability to tap and do 1 damage to any target.
So tell them the classic play.
Yeah, well, there's an obvious line of play for this, which is why you should play it. I mean, you know, 1 mana to play it, whatever. 3 to equip for that ability. It's really not all that great when you first look at it. Like, so what? For 4 mana, I'm just going to ping someone every turn? What do I care? But remember, creatures that have Death Touch can kill other creatures regardless of how they do damage to them. So the fact that this gives the creature the ability to tap and deal the damage makes Death Touch creatures instant death for any other creature on the board. And that's why I love this card.
Yeah, and it ends up being pay 3 mana, tap a creature, kill a creature, which is a great trade-out in most scenarios.
Right.
But also you add something in there like lifelink. That's not too bad either.
Exactly, and we have a lot more like Death Touch Lords these days, especially one of my favorite commanders of the past year, Sareth the Viper's Fang, which gives all of your tapped creatures Death Touch. Death Touch, again, we've established, ping something to kill something. Oh, and look, what happens? It taps. Oh, it has Death Touch now. Look at that. Isn't that fun?
But let's also look into a different mechanic like Infect. You go ahead, you put on an Infect creature who now for some reason can't get through and deal damage. All right, I'll just do 1 damage per turn to you, and let's get that clock going down to 0.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, you know, how the damage is dealt from this. It's just the creature deals the damage. So any keywords like lifelink or Death Touch or Infect apply to it.
Yeah. The only thing is, if it's something that it says it has to deal combat damage as an effect, that would be the only thing where this would not work. But again, this is an artifact. This is an equipment. It's a 1-drop. This is tutorable in a lot of different ways, especially if you're in blue.
Yeah, a lot of the time it's very inefficient mana-wise, but if you have a critical mass of mostly Death Touch creatures, I'd say it's absolutely worth it.
Yep, I agree.
All right, what's your last card here?
So moving on to number 1, I didn't know this card existed until we ended up having it reprinted, and it was in one of those mystery box sets. And I was like, this is a card? Because again, I wasn't playing a Mirrodin. This is a card called Leveler. It is 5 mana generic for a 10/10 artifact creature. They didn't even put a creature type on it, which cracks me up. I'm pretty sure it's a golem or a construct, just by guessing at this point. But when it comes into play, remove your library from the game. It's very, very easy to go ahead and cast this, your library's gone. The only thing that you have to make sure you do carefully is you combo this out with something else so you win instantly. Thassa's Oracle was a newer card that got printed, where it's like you go ahead, you play this, for 2 more mana, play Thassa's Oracle, you win instantaneously. You don't have to worry about Laboratory Maniac, you don't have to worry about Lab Jace, Planeswalker Jace, who has the same effect as Laboratory Maniac, you can just go ahead and do it then. So that means you would ideally be in blue, unless you have something else to make it so that, all right, they're doing this for some sort of reason. Like you cast this and it goes into an opponent's side of the field.
By the way, I just checked and we were both wrong on what type this is. Is a Juggernaut creature.
That makes
there's like 5 of them in the entire game. Oh, you know, whatever. You're definitely right about this.
If you
though.
knew that, or if you didn't know that, just honest up, like just say it in the comments.
But you're definitely right about this though, where it is essentially like if you're playing one of those decks where you care about like getting rid of it. This is basically 5 mana, you win the game if this resolves. So I don't have too much to say about it. The stats are pretty much irrelevant. It's definitely worth it,
I wonder if they really actually meant to make this a creature for the fact that they didn't have it. Like we have golems and there's so many artifact creatures. Like I wonder if they actually meant for this just to be a 5-drop artifact.
I don't know. I mean, Eater of Days is a creature, and it's like skip your next turn when you play it, and it's this giant thing, and I'm like, but that's terrible. Like, anyway, I don't know at the time whether they had a combo.
What's that mean about what I'm saying?
Well, no, I'm just saying, like, at the time, I don't know.
What's it mean with the creature type?
Oh, the Juggernaut? I don't know. But I'm saying, what I'm saying is, at the time that they printed this, I don't know that they meant for it to combo with anything. It was just like, oh, we'll give you a giant discounted creature for a big drawback. But now, of course, with the game, how the game has evolved, I think a lot of people look at this as a combo piece, and rightly so, because it kind of is at this point.
What would be the old school thing? You like give it haste and double strike? And,
I guess. I have no idea, honestly. This is a garbage card outside of those exile your library.
But again, this is why it was in Mystery Boosters. I saw it had a foil edition. I was like, that's worthy of a foil. And I think it's because they realized nobody knew this card existed anymore.
Yeah, probably true.
Yeah. But moving on to your number 1.
Yes, I'm going to tone it down a slight bit, but this is still a really cool card.
That's a lot coming.
Number 1, Aether Spellbomb. Now, it's funny because in our previous video, Stu had another Spellbomb as his number 10. Now we're going up to number 1, and I've got a Spellbomb of my own, baby.
Yeah, we did not plan this.
No, we did not plan this at all, but it's just funny how these things work out. So this one is, again, a 1-mana artifact with 2 different abilities. You can either tap 1 colorless to sacrifice it and draw a card, or you can tap 1 blue and sacrifice it to return target creature to its owner's hand.
This is the most commonly seen Spellbomb.
Yeah, of the original Spellbomb cycle, this is my favorite, and this is the one I believe is the best, because it's,
That's why you picked
it. Well, right, exactly. But this, number 1, you can play it, it sticks around. As I said in the previous video, spells on permanents are really, really good for a lot of reasons, especially this, an artifact that's 1 mana can be recurred super easily by any number of cards.
It's unsummon as an artifact pretty much.
Exactly, and unsummon is not really an amazing card.
Well, it's a good card.
I wouldn't play unsummon in a commander deck. I would play this in a commander deck because artifact.
Yeah.
That's really the only reason.
Well, and it is modal. Like, all right, sometimes creatures aren't the issue, or you need to draw a card. Like, the fact that this can be 2 separate options for you, like we've always seen and talked about modal cards being so strong, and this was kind of like the first taste of that.
Yeah, they kind of were, really. And the fact, having this in play, and being able to threaten to get rid of somebody's creature, even temporarily, it deters them from attacking you, which then leads you into the, oh, nobody attacked me this turn, I'm just going to go ahead and draw a card off this.
Yeah, pretty much it's whatever you need it to be, and it's so low on the mana cost, it's like, I mean, why wouldn't you not play it when you had the chance and then just leave 1 mana open and be like, take a guess?
And even if I'm not really running a deck that's heavily artifact-based, this is something I always consider including because it's just that good. Like, being able to sit around and not do anything until you need it, and meanwhile add to your artifact count. With all the crazy artifact stuff nowadays, you can tap it for mana, you can turn it into a creature, you can do any number of things with this.
You can do so many things.
Yeah.
And actually, the one thing that's kind of fun is, we always see the notorious, there's 2 blue lands open right there. He's got 2 islands. It means counter spells in the hand. You only need 1 in this case, and it's telegraphed, but it's still, you're going to mess with me. the political value on this card is great.
Oh yeah, and same with all of these Spellbomb cards. They're great stuff. Great stuff.
But that is going to conclude the last of our hidden gems. The next segment we're going to go ahead and release are going to be the money cards, which are the 10 glorious pieces of paper that have been printed that we were not allowed to pick from.
Yep. So until then, you can find us all over social media if you're interested in more content. We're on Reddit. We're on Tapped Out with all of our cool deck lists. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. And you can find us all at the handle TheCardPool.
And until then, I'm Stu.
I'm Kyle.
And we'll see you next time at the Card Pool. Yeah, that Spellbomb, I knew that as soon as I saw it, you're going to pick that.
I'm that predictable, am I?
Yes.
All right. Yeah, maybe a little bit.